so far.
Welcome back to Close Encounters of the Blerd Kind, your guide to all things black and nerdy. I'm Rynn.
I'm Weaver.
And today, sadly, we do not have Parker with us, but we do have a very special guest. We have the guest Jhariah, who is a consummate musician and everything, and I'm going to let Weaver introduce him because they have met him personally. This is the first time we've spoken one-on-one, but I am honored. So take it away, Weaver.
So this is a very interesting story because a couple months ago, right after my first TikTok account got hacked and I had to start a new one, it was right when that Amanda Palmer cover of
Pressure
from Encanto.
The fact that everyone just immediately was like, "Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you're talking
about." Yeah, no,
yeah.
No, thank you, Amanda Palmer. Yeah, very cringe. Right after that, I made a TikTok absolutely blasting Amanda Palmer because she deserves it because she's a piece of shit.
She really is.
But I made a video talking about the dark cabaret scene and how it's very white, and how like 90% of the scene is sort of just like ripping off black musicians. There's a very strong like voodoo aesthetic undercurrent in a lot of like dark cabaret, which is like very blatantly appropriative. So I made a video talking about how I wish there were more like black musicians in the dark cabaret and adjacent scene. And like 30 people tagged Jhariah in my video and they were like, this isn't exactly the same genre, but you should check him out. And of course I did. And I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. And then like two days later, maybe 1 day later, my friend Irene invited me to go to the show at the Heck House because the person that was producing the show is Irene's friend Kit Faye, and Irene wanted to introduce me to Kit. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. Like Irene was literally texting me at like 3 a.m. like, hey, you want to go to this tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, okay. And I fell asleep because it was 3 a.m. And then I woke up the next day and I saw that like spur of the moment, like it had not been this way before, but just, within the past couple days, the listing for the Heck House show had updated to like include Jhariah. And I was like, what are the odds? So yeah, I went to the show and I bought this cool shirt, like awesome Jhariah merch. I got it signed. There's this cool orange knife. It kind of looks like a carrot. But I'm a big fan. Yeah, and then I got to meet Jhariah and you were very cool. All right, now I'll let you talk.
Well, also, sorry, before not to cut in, but also one thing to mention, you've already heard Jhariah's work because Jhariah did us the honor of letting us use his song for our intro. That is, what's the name of that piece, Jhariah?
Oh, right, yeah. It's called Enter Beginner's Guide to Faking Your Death.
Nice.
Sort of title track, I guess, from the last EP I released.
It works very well with like our content here. It very much hits the vibe, and Weaver has done some amazing editing work with it.
While I was editing the video a couple days ago, my husband came in the room and he was like, "That sounds like an anime intro." I'm like, "Doesn't it?"
Yeah, it kind of
does. It's very epic. And I was really interested in like the recurring theme of like luck and fortune that's in so many of your songs because I've been writing a story called Gate City Blues that features a sort of trickster god character named the Jack of Diamonds, who is like a remnant of my main character's father, who was a vaudeville magician. And so I've been reading a lot about like trickster gods and
isn't that like also like your alter ego or persona?
Yes,
or
the
what
Jack
have
of
you?
Diamonds is also my drag king persona. So yeah, so like the motifs of like the playing cards and the dice like really resonated with me. How did you like come to that like imagery?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. I think if you would have asked me that question like a year ago, I probably would have an entirely different answer. But I've recently kind of, I guess I made this realization a while ago that a lot of the time I'll just write songs and then they'll just be little stories. And then I'll kind of look back at like the period where I was writing that or what was happening. And I'll be like, yeah, that was pretty relevant to what what I was going through. Because at the time, I can't really tell, you know, it's like I'm just writing a little story. So that's kind of where my head was at the time. I was like, I just want to write some music. This was way back in, way back. I mean, it was like in 2020 or like 2021 when that song like first came about, and it
That's
was
okay. 2020
originally
might as well have been 6,000 years ago. So,
no,
And
literally.
also last week.
yeah.
And it originally was it was called Myself in Two, and I think originally I wrote it about just the fact that like anything can happen and sometimes bad things happen, you know, and it was just
Yeah.
like I was just in one of those moods where I'm like, I'm gonna write a dramatic song about like bad stuff happening. And then after I got into the whole EP and the whole like faking your death story, I remember feeling like there was like a missing piece. And I remember that sort of demo I put together from what would become Bad Luck, which is like I think sort of the centerpiece of the whole luck theme, you know, and that ended up being a thing where I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I was going to release this without this. This feels like completely necessary. And I think the reason I sort of settled on that like imagery and that way of telling the story is because I was just feeling like I felt like luck just wasn't in my favor. You know, I don't really believe in luck necessarily as like a trait or an attribute. Like I don't know if I believe that people have luck, you know. I think it's
Mhm.
more that situations and opportunities and risks kind of define like what your luck is and what happens. And I think I just kind of had this moment of like things going wrong like constantly, and you know trying to accomplish things, trying to be a musician, trying to, you know, grow as a person, and being like constantly just like bombarded with like new obstacles, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I just kind of came to a bit of a conclusion where I was like, I don't think it really matters like what comes my way as far as luck, because I think at the very least I have the ability to just keep pushing forward, and whatever happens happens. So it was one of those things where I stopped like wishing for my luck to get better and just kind of started wishing for like more I don't know, I guess just more, oh my god, what is the word, I just had it, more I guess tenacity
Mhm.
Gotcha.
to kind of
Like kind of
push through.
taking control of your own fate or whatever,
Yeah.
or destiny.
Exactly.
Okay, okay. I think that that's like super valid. Like I've definitely had similar sort of revelations in terms of just like realizing that like life is, I mean, not to quote the illustrious Hannah Montana, but life's what you make it. And
So true.
Let's make it rock.
yeah, exactly. And so I just think that it is so, I mean, obviously there are circumstances that are beyond your control, but my life totally took a different direction when I just started sort of taking control of my own like destiny to the extent that I could, in terms of just like, you know, making decisions for myself. Like, you know, I'm me. I have one life to live, and I can't live it based on like what other people's expectations or desires or demands, what have you.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say, one of the things that I really love about your music is like I so strongly associate all of your music with my drag persona, the Jack of Diamonds, who
Hell
is
yeah.
very heavily inspired by the West African trickster god Eshu Elegbara. Um, he was like a Orisha of the Yoruba religion. He was like the god of the crossroads, the god of duality, of being two opposite things simultaneously. And like his colors, depending on who you ask, are red and black or black and white. Um, and when it comes to bad luck, within the Yoruba religion, as you know, as far as my research has gone, you know, I'm not like a practitioner of this religion, so if anybody is, feel free to correct me. But from what I've read in like scholarly articles and stuff, Eshu is considered like the mouthpiece of the gods. Not only that, but like the actual mouth of the gods. And there's this expression that like um there's this idea that because he's a trickster, he's both good and bad. And so there's this idea that Eshu causes bad things to happen. Eshu causes the bad luck, which causes people to have to sacrifice to the gods. And so like he is necessary within that cycle. So it's like, you know, if your house gets struck by lightning and burns down, like, you know, maybe they'll say like Eshu did that. Like, you know, Eshu burned down my house so that the gods can eat, because you know when something bad happens you'll go sacrifice to the gods, and like if Eshu didn't cause bad luck then the gods would starve. And I thought that was like a really interesting sort of cosmology of viewing bad luck as like
Huh.
necessary,
Yeah.
yeah, in
It kind
order
of
for the
reminds me
gods to
Yeah.
perpetuate.
it kind of reminds me of how, so like when I started deconstructing my faith, and well now I'm Jewish, but I was raised like super Christian. And one of the things that I looked into when I was started deconstructing was like the reality of like the linguistic understanding and even like the Jewish understanding of the devil, or like Satan. Like in Christian circles it's very much like the devil is a persona, is one individual. It's like there's
Yeah,
God
he's
and then
like
there's the
a
devil. There's a
guy.
duality: good, bad. God's good,
Yeah,
Satan's bad, and they fight against each other or whatever. But like in the Hebrew language, Satan is like a language for, or like it is translated in a couple different ways. But I believe one of the ways is just like the enemy, and it's a very nebulous term that can be applied to
yeah,
like any person or group of people. It's not like an individual. It's just like a word for an opposition or an enemy, which can
yeah,
be, or an obstacle, which can be anyone or anything, which
Mm.
completely changes so much of like theology and so much of like your
yeah.
understanding of certain passages,
I
when
was
you realize that.
I was just talking to
Crazy.
my mom the other day about how so much of what we consider like cornerstones of Christian theology wasn't in the Bible at all, but came
Mhm.
directly from Dante's Inferno,
Dante's Inferno, yeah.
or what's Paradise Lost. Like I was
Mhm.
telling my mom, like, did you know the Bible never says that the snake in the garden was Satan? John Milton said that in Paradise Lost, and then everybody for centuries after just accepted that as like the correct interpretation. But that's not in the Bible. Like
Basically
so
like
much of
Bible fan fiction.
exactly like
Yeah.
Bible fan
The
fiction,
fanon
and like
becomes the canon.
so much of what we believe within Christianity about Satan and about demons specifically comes from like medieval and Renaissance and Enlightenment, like dead white guys making up
Mhm.
fan fiction, and we all
And
have just like
also what we
accepted
believe
that as
about like
fact.
the rapture. Like the
Yeah.
Bible does not say very much about a rapture or second coming at all.
There's
And
like
like
literally one guy wrote a book in the 1800s, like an Irish guy, and was like, I
yeah,
think this is how we should interpret that. And then everybody was like, okay, we'll
yeah, this
just
is
take
law.
that as
Like
gospel.
I feel like
even
that's something I always thought about a lot, like specifically because, like, for I guess for context, like I went to Catholic school for like 12 years,
ew.
So hey,
All right.
You got that special brand of trauma.
oh my god, don't even get me started. But it was. I feel like there was like so much stuff where like the more and more I learned about it, the more I was like, damn, like I feel like half the stuff I've heard people just say like anecdotally or just like in my life, I'm like, none of that's in here. Like
Yeah.
y'all just be making things
Yeah.
up. And like
They
Yeah.
really do.
and then like some
Truly.
people, people bring it up in class and be like, why did they say this? Why did they say that? And it'd be like, oh yo, you gotta see this movie, or you gotta like see like read this book or something. Or maybe you just be like, I don't know. People just started saying that and it just really
Mhm.
stuck
Yeah.
because it evoked a reaction,
Or like forgetting the historical context, like the entire book of Revelation, which is the only book in the Bible that supposedly talks about the final days. But if you look at it in historical context, many scholars agree that like this was a book written specifically about like the Roman conquest, and like all of the things that they mention are specific to the audience that he was writing for at the time, which was like early Christians in the Roman Empire, and like
Yeah.
the beast was just Nero and that kind of stuff. It's like, and most of the stuff was very limited stuff for the audience that he was writing to. It was not meant to be taken by people 2,000 years later and used to me like, oh, this is what the end of the world's going to look like or whatever.
While I was doing my makeup today, I was thinking about the fact that my grandfather asked me to send him the links to the podcast because he would like to watch it. And I was like, as I was doing my makeup, I was like, oh, My granddad's gonna see this. He's gonna have questions for me. But I was as I was like, penciling in my little Gomez Adams mustache and my little goatee, I was
Which looks
thinking
great.
about, thank you. I was thinking about how we associate the pencil mustache plus goatee with Satan. There's so many drawings
Yeah.
of Satan with the little goatee and the horns and the little red suit. And like, that's not in the Bible. The Bible does not describe Satan as having, a pencil mustache and a goatee. But you know where it does come from? Back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a really common trend for stage magicians to do shows themed around Faust or like Dante's
We
Inferno.
saw that. Remember at the museum in Atlanta, we saw
Yeah.
like pictures from those shows in the 20s, those vaudeville shows and stuff where they
we
had like the little demon characters.
Rynn and I went to the Atlanta History Center the last time they came to visit Atlanta. But yeah, and I have been studying magic history because my dad was into magic and I have a lot of like weird trauma around that. But yeah, like magicians would have these posters of showing like the little demons over their shoulder and so like what we have in our mind of like what demons look like is like posters from like vaudeville, and like the kinds of things they wear are the kinds of things that performers wore in the vaudeville era, and the kind of facial hair they had is the kind of facial hair they had in the early 20th century. But also like there's a very distinct anti-immigrant sort of sentiment, because when you think of like the pale skin with the dark hair and you think about depictions of like Eastern European and Italian immigrants at the time
Anti-Semitic.
and like anti-Semitic tropes of like these villainous characteristics are just people like foreigners, and now
Yeah.
we associate that with
Yeah, there's so much of that in history, like so much, even like fairy tales and stuff. So much of like even like a witch, like the stereotypical witch, is just anti-Semitic caricatures and stuff
this
like
is
that.
this is
Oh,
way
yeah.
out of nowhere, but I just learned this on TikTok the other day. So back in the day, before like, we have like our electric ovens and stuff. So back in the day, there would be community ovens, and the way that like wood fire ovens would work is you would light a fire in there, wait for it to get hot because the whole oven was like made out of stone or brick or whatever, and so like the stone would absorb the heat, and then you would remove the fire, and then the stove would steadily cool over time, and you would have to like plan out which thing goes in first, and then after 8 hours you can put in the other things, and then after like so many hours you put in the stuff that doesn't need a lot of heat, like pudding or whatever the fuck. And there was this has like been documented that like midwives and like wise women who were vilified as witches, like women that communicated with other women about
I know
like
exactly where you're
how to
going with
take care
this.
of their own bodies, would use these cooling ovens as incubators for premature babies, because they would be kept warm but not too warm. And so that is where a lot of the imagery of like witches putting children in ovens.
Yeah, like the whole like Hansel and Gretel trying to eat witches eating children, that comes from that. Anyway, Jhariah, we've been talking a lot. Like,
Yeah,
you go
I'm
ahead and say
gonna bring it back around. Jhariah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm learning so much. Like, I'm listening to a podcast right now.
So when I was a teenager, like a middle school teenager, I had friends that were really into like Panic at the Disco, Fall Out Boy, MCR.
Same.
However, I was listening to Christian radio. I was listening to Switchfoot
Same.
and Reliant K and Hawk Nelson,
Same.
and I feel like I missed out on like the peak era of pop punk, and I didn't
Reliant
really
K slaps though. I will stand by that. Reliant K is good.
That's true.
Speaking of which, you should check out my friend Grace Simler Baldridge.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, she's the first openly queer musician to chart #1 on the Christian music charts.
And she headlined for Reliant K.
Yeah, she headlined for Reliant K back in 2020. She went viral on TikTok for a project called Reliant Gay, in which she was like doing covers of like youth group era songs from a queer lens. And it started off with like the Be My Escape or something like that.
Yes,
by Reliant K.
I'm begging you to be my escape. I fucking love that song.
Yes, and the one that was really haunting, for me is she did like a very like toned down, chill, like eerie minor key cover of DC Talk's Jesus Freak.
Oh
And
yeah.
it was so haunting because the song is about, you know, the evangelical fetishization of like martyrdom and like, you know, imagining yourself to be persecuted. But
Yes.
it was so haunting to hear you know, like uh what would people say when they find out I'm a Jesus freak, like blah blah blah, like this song about being persecuted, about being driven out, sung by someone who was driven out of the Christian church, who was persecuted by Christians.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so like after that went popular, she went on tour with Reliant K. She made history, and then they didn't invite her to the Dove Awards, which was just like a week or two ago. But she bought a ticket and she went, and that was
Damn.
very cool. So yeah, check out Similar also.
Okay,
Um,
well, I'm doing some Googling
yeah. But
Also
yeah,
check out
so
11D7, which is a friend of mine.
I
And they ran in. Have you heard 11D7, Weaver?
have not.
They ran in similar circles to Reliant K. They weren't quite as big, but they were in the same. I think they were on the same label. And
Gotcha.
the lead singer is a guy named Matt, who's actually a friend of mine. We actually went to college together. Long
Oh,
weird
wild.
story.
Oh, wow.
But Matt is really cool and very queer friendly, and they're making new music like soon. So yeah.
Gotcha. So yeah, Jhariah, I can tell there's like a very strong like pop punk influence in your work, and I'm now like as an adult, like I was I didn't really get into like MCR and Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy until like 2020, when I was just like, let me just change everything about what I listened to, just because I felt like there was so much music that I had missed out on from like having
Yeah,
listened to nothing but Christian radio for the first like several decades of my life. And but you're like, it's such a like unique perspective, and I just like how I want to learn a little bit about like how you sort of came up with your style, like your musical influences, like how you got to this point, like to create your specific Jhariah sound.
Yeah, and particularly with being a black person in that space. Like, let's be real, a lot of pop punk is very white. And because the focus of the show is like centering black folks who are in
Yeah.
spheres that may not be traditionally considered black spaces. I'm very curious to hear that.
for sure. Okay, I've been thinking a lot about this, so I'm gonna try and like keep it contained. I feel like I have like a lot of trains of thoughts here, but I guess I'll just kind of
You'll fit
start.
right in.
Yes. Yeah.
In college, like not to go on a tangent, but in
Please do.
college, freshman year of college, me and my friends ran like a radio show. It was called On a Tangent, and it's
Hey.
and
Nice.
it's because like we would just start talking about stuff. Like we'd bring in a list of topics, and then what would happen is the first topic would just lead us to like an hour long tangent. We'd be like, okay, we'll continue this
Yep.
next week.
As long as
But
you plan
anyways,
for the tangents to be intentional,
exactly,
then it's on purpose.
it's great. But okay. So as far as like finding my sound, finding my style. So I think we're gonna just go to the beginning, I guess. Like as a very young kid, I actually didn't like music like at all. It was one of
Wow.
those things where probably until I was like, I don't know, like 8 or something like that. I felt like I just couldn't like decipher anything individually from music. It's like somebody
Hmm.
would play a song and it would just sound like noise to me, you know? It's like so much was just going on, you know, especially if it was like
Mhm.
loud music. Like I'd be like, I'm just not, I don't get it, you know? Like there's nothing
Hmm.
happening. Everything is happening, you know?
Yeah,
Which
like
is funny.
sensory overload.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was kind of like that. You know, it was to the point where I couldn't pick anything out of the music that I like or dislike. Like it was just like, this is like a sensory experience. Not here for it.
Hmm.
And I don't know what song. I don't think any particular song did it, but I feel like being like a child, music just ends up being a big part of like your life. You know, like it's a big part of like children's programming, and it's, you know, you go to like kindergarten and you sing a little song in the morning and in the evening, and you know, I think that was kind of necessary for me. Like I don't think I was ever a kid where music was like a natural language to me. I think I really had to like be eased into it through like little
Hmm.
things like that. And I think when I started, the first time I started listening to music like independently on my own was it might have been the Black Eyed Peas or something.
Nice.
I
Interesting introduction.
yeah, I remember that was like one of the first songs I ever like listened to. It was the Black Eyed Peas, and this was around the same
Which
time as
song?
um
My Humps?
no. Well, at the time, which I feel like is important context, it was the original version of Let's Get It Started.
Oh
That
no!
was probably the song.
Oh no!
R.I.P.
Oh no! I recently made a video about that, like on TikTok, and the amount of people who don't know that there is like an original alternate version of that song. Oh,
I feel like they really scrubbed that from
they
history, you
really
know?
did. I got played, and people were like, "Oh my god, they released this!" I'm like, "Yeah, this was a whole thing. Like they pretty successfully erased it from everybody's
Yeah.
collective memory, but it happened. You can still find it on YouTube."
Oh yeah, and I didn't know what was going on, but I used to watch like AMVs, you know. So it's like I remember that. I remember one of my friends telling me about "In the End" by Linkin Park for the first time. That was like a big moment. I was big on. Did you any of y'all ever use like the like Flipnote Hatina thing or
I don't
whatever, where
think
it's
so.
like people. So I was a big DS kid, and you could they had like the Flipnote app where you could animate stuff, and I was like, oh cool, I'd animate like just anything, like stick figure things and like little fight scenes. Like that was kind of like my introduction to animation. But there was this feature where you could go online and you could see what stuff people had uploaded, so it was like kind of like the equivalent of TikTok for me at the time and for a lot of kids, where it was just this endless stream of like just user created content, and you could sync music to it because you could get like your SD card and throw it in your DS, and any sounds that were on there you could throw into your sounds. So that's how a lot of kids, like including myself, discovered like their first favorite band. So it was like that's how I got into Sum 41. That's how I got into um I don't know, like 3 Days Grace and stuff like that. Just a bunch of dudes making guitar
Bunch of
music,
dudes.
Bunch of dudes.
Did you find that it was easier for you to sort of conceptualize or like digest music once that like visual component was added? Because that's something I've noticed even in just doing the editing for this podcast. I've tried to make a podcast before without video, and just editing the audio, my brain hurts so bad, but like when
Yeah,
there's video to it, it like makes sense.
exactly.
It's like it
And that's
engages
I
two
think
different parts of your brain.
you
Yeah.
kind of read my mind. That's kind of where I
Yeah.
was where I was going with it, is that led me into getting really into like anime music, and like anime openings was the first time when I was like really like felt like a real reaction to music. Like the songs come on and like you have the opening and it'd be like amazing. My brain is like firing off right now. I'd be watching like Naruto, or I'd be watching like cartoons, watching Ben 10 or something, and be like, these
Nice.
songs go crazy, but the visuals
Mhm.
are like what did it, which I think is like
Yeah.
permanently just created that link for me. But
This
oh, go on.
this is gonna feel like it comes out of left field, but I promise there's a connection. So, have
Go
you
for it.
either of you seen the Miami Boys Choir videos?
I've seen
I don't think
references to
so.
them on TikTok, but I
So
don't
it's
have not seen many actual videos.
so the Miami Boys Choir is a Jewish boys choir, and it's been around for like a
Oh, I
while.
know the one you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, and
There's like this
what
whole
Yeah.
fandom discourse about like who gets the solos, and like there's a lot of
yeah,
opinions people have about
there's
these
like a whole fandom
12-year-old
for it.
boys.
And one of their songs, Rushalayim, which is just Jerusalem in Hebrew, but it went viral on TikTok, and a lot of people were like,
I
"This
remember
sounds like
that.
an epic anime theme." And apparently, and I read this in a comment. Now I'll say right now, I read this in a TikTok comment. I have not taken the time to cross source it yet, so I take this with a grain of salt. But according to somebody in the comments, apparently anime themes were inspired by like traditional Jewish music, and
That
that's
makes
why
so
there's
much
like a
sense.
comparison.
Interesting.
That makes so much sense. Oh my god.
What you were saying before, Jhariah, about having trouble like with the sensory element of music, I have felt in terms of like making music. I've tried so many times to learn how to play musical instruments, and I just feel like there's something that's not clicking. and it feels like I have to try really hard to like force my brain to understand it. Like my husband plays guitar, and he'll like try to explain to me the difference between like the upbeat and the downbeat, and my brain like literally cannot parse it. And like that's we're all black
Yeah.
here. I have I have
Yeah.
no I have no internal sense of rhythm, and I am like so ashamed of that.
Yeah.
I'm like not a real, like I'm already biracial. I've already got that against me. And also I clap on 1 and 3. Like
No, double
Oof, rip,
homicide.
oof.
That's
right.
great. I'm so
I
sorry.
blame it on the autism. But I feel like my brain processes the audio like half a step after my ears are hearing it. I just feel like
Yeah.
there's a delay, and it's really like, and I love to listen to music, but I remember when I was a kid trying to figure out how to clap and sing at the same time was like incredibly
Crazy.
difficult.
Uh-huh.
I Yeah, and it's just I just felt like my brain had a really hard time just being able to like identify, you know, what was the rhythm versus what was the melody. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear that you had like a similar experience.
Do you
Yeah.
guys
And
remember the
it's like
CBAT discourse that
I
happened really recently on TikTok?
I
Yes.
didn't really dive into it, but I remember it happening.
Yeah, because there was like a whole music theory discourse surrounding that in terms of like, is he
Yeah.
thrusting to the beat or to the rhythm? Which I think most
And
of the people
Uh
agreed
I'm
that
like,
it
what's
was.
the difference? I
Yeah,
can't
well,
tell.
I think that most people agreed it was the
right.
rhythm because like she recognized it without the music, and so there's a
Mm.
very specific like there's a very specific rhythm to it, and it's like it's a very actually like complex rhythm. Like it is not exactly 3/4 or 4/4. It's like a compound rhythm thing. It's weird.
Yeah. Damn. But okay, it's really interesting that you bring that up because I guess I've never really like fully thought about it, but that was like a big thing for me too, you know. And I think the way that music started to make sense for me over a really long period of time. Like I started playing piano when I was 9, and then I started like messing with production and stuff when I was like 11 or 12 or something, and that was like the big thing for me because when you're producing and you're like in like a digital workspace, you can see all of it.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
when I realized because okay, here's a cool thing.
You can
Here's a
like
little
see
story.
a map like flowchart.
Yeah. So okay, here's a fun story. When I was 9 or 10 or something, I got really, really into piano, like just teaching myself. My sister had this toy piano, and she did not like playing it. Like my parents got it because she was like, "Oh, it'd be cool for for her to learn music," and she was like, "Not for me." But I was like, "This is cool because I can play." I would look up YouTube tutorials and I'd watch people play the songs and I'd write down each note they were playing. Like I'd pause and go frame by frame, and then I would like repeat it and I'd be like, "Cool, I can play this instrument." And eventually I took piano lessons, and it started off really good because I think I had like a good like sense of it physically, you know, like I could play the keys, and if I practice a song enough, like I could kind of play anything, you know. And when it got really difficult for me is when I started, my teacher was like, "Cool, you can play. It's time for you to learn music theory. Like that's what you got to do if you want to take this
Yeah.
any further." And for the life of me, I couldn't do it. It's like
Mhm.
just the idea of music, like conceptually, like in only in terms of ideas and sounds. And it's like, sure, there's a visual element because there's sheet music and you're writing it,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to really understand it, like sonically. And I couldn't do it. So I kind of ended up like stopping lessons and putting it down. And I remember one of the big things for me was that around that time, my music teacher at school heard me playing and was like, "Hey, you should try out for this program at Juilliard. They have like a children's program." And she was
Mm.
like, "I think you're really like gifted. You should try this thing." And you know, like they could really help you like work on this skill at a level that like I can't really in this like, you know, Catholic school music class that you take once a week.
Yeah.
So I went for it and I did the test, and the performance section went great. And then they asked, there was like a music theory test. Of course, I don't know why I didn't expect that. And
Mm.
I got like a 0. Like I didn't know what was going on.
Oof.
So that didn't end up
Oof.
happening. But then it's really funny that you brought up that idea of like it just not making sense. Because I think once I could see it and I was learning how to produce music, I realized that I could create these like visual motifs in my head for everything, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well,
So
like what you said about earlier about how it's like a language, I completely relate to that too because
Yeah.
I was a music major in college and I studied music, but music
Oh,
theory,
I didn't know that.
whoa,
yeah.
that's crazy.
Oh yeah, but music theory kicked my ass. It was my least favorite class. I hated it because I've always been a very musical person. I've always enjoyed singing. I've always enjoyed harmonizing. I've like my mom likes to sing. I've got several aunts and cousins who play piano and all kind of stuff. So we're a very musical family. But when it came to like the actual like doing it right or following the rules, my brain just like it cracked because I was like, I have such an intrinsic sense of music. Like I can hear something and I can harmonize with it and I know what sounds good and what doesn't. But like when it
Yeah.
came to like breaking it down linguistically, I was like, oh, this is a lot. I don't like it. Like, and Jhariah, I'm
That's
curious,
crazy.
like, so you mentioned like sensory things and that kind of stuff. So are you, if you don't mind my asking, are you like on the spectrum or are you like ADHD or anything like that might have affected your perception?
I assume everyone's autistic until proven otherwise.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I've suspected I have ADHD for a long time, but I feel like I I just never really gotten around to like
Yeah, especially like
properly figuring
black
that out.
children are so
Yes.
often overlooked. Things manifest so much differently for us also because like our parents are more likely to reinforce for us how much of our survival is contingent on conformity because like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we
if
are
you're like
born masking basically.
yeah, like
Oh yeah.
if you're out in the grocery store having a meltdown, like there's a whole other layer to your parents telling you that like that's not
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
And
it's
we were just Weaver
serious.
and I were just talking about before we started recording, like there was a shortage of everything, which is weird, but there's a shortage of ADHD medication, and there were some people who were like, oh well, it's probably because over the pandemic, like it was overdiagnosed. I'm like, no, the fact that people realized that they were ADHD over the pandemic makes a lot of sense
That makes
because
Yeah.
we had a
sense.
lot of time to like spend with ourselves and realize what the fuck. So the fact that there are so many people who realized that they were trans or they were
Yeah.
neurodivergent or they were whatever, like
That's gonna
when
happen.
have we as a
Yeah.
society had several collective months where we had no choice but to spend a ton of time with
Talk to yourself. Yeah.
ourselves?
Oh my god,
I
yeah.
there was a TikTok recently where somebody was like, "Sure seems like there's a lot of autistic people these days. Were there always this much autistic people?"
Like,
And it's like,
yes.
yeah, but also like the fact that more people are getting diagnosed and the fact that it's becoming more noticeable is directly tied to the fact that the world is changing so fast. Like when you
Yeah.
think about what the human body was evolved for, and you consider ADHD and autism as like just natural, useful variations, you know, you're a useful member of the community. Like back in
Mhm.
farming days, somebody had to be okay with sitting down and shelling walnuts for 16 hours. You know, if you were
Mhm.
very easily distracted, that probably made you a good hunter. You know, like somebody's got to go stand out there with the
Yeah.
sheep. Like there are a lot of like jobs in farming communities, a lot of ways of life that are very very compatible with autism and ADHD,
Mhm.
such that if that was just your job, you might go your whole life never having any problems. But like the industrial revolution, when you think about like the whole scale of like how long humans have existed and like how long it took our bodies and minds to evolve, and like the industrial revolution was only like, you know, 100 200 like the past
Yeah, just
100
a
to
couple
200
hundred years
years.
ago.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
like our society has changed so fast that like our brains literally cannot keep up. And so
Mhm.
like yeah, it is very contingent on like what kind of environment and like capitalism and like these external factors that like make these things worse.
Yeah, even the idea of
Oh
like
yeah.
morning people and like night owls and stuff like that. Like people, like someone I saw a tweet the other day that's like, why do we give so much power to morning people? Like, why is it socially acceptable that you're not functional after 8:30 p.m., but the fact that I'm not functional before 8:30 a.m. is weird. But it's like if you think about when we lived in like hunter gatherer societies where somebody always had to stand watch for the wolves and shit, it makes sense that some people are more inclined to wake up early and some people are more inclined to stay up late.
That natural variation was necessary, but now like sort of capitalism forces us to all have to conform to the same pattern.
And even the electricity. or like the idea of
Yes.
or the chromatics. I've talked about this theory of chromatics on TikTok before. How, you know, the whole stereotype of, oh, Black people are always late, they're running on CP time and that kind of stuff. A lot
Yeah.
of people who live in like
Guilty.
particularly tropical climates and like sub equatorial climates run on a sense of time that is very much dependent on like seasons, and is very much, you know, has a lot of room to flow and to
Because
breathe.
the closer
Whereas,
you are to the equator, the less like variation there is in day length. So
yeah, exactly.
it's not as noticeable to you when like hours have been passing because the sun is in a similar position in the
Yeah,
sky.
and when you're hunting and
Huh.
stuff, and you have got all the time in the world to plant your crops or whatever. Whereas if you're from a more like a society that is more susceptible to dramatic climate changes, like a lot of places in Western Europe, for example,
Yeah, like
you do have to
temperate,
really be
like
paying attention about,
is
okay,
the
well, winter's
yeah.
coming, we can only plant crops to a certain degree, whatever. So that explains why so many white people are more like, you know, 8 o'clock means 8 o'clock, whereas so many people of color are like,
Yeah. And
like,
it also got a lot
It's
worse with
really just there.
the railroads because like
yes.
railroads really forced everybody to keep to like a very specific schedule. Um yeah, I think I think this is as good as a time as any to take a little break for our ads.
Oh yes, an ad break.
Ah, that break.
Okay, time for our ad break section. So, we are going to be plugging in our own little things right now because we are the only people who support ourselves. So, I am, of course, Rinstar on TikTok, at the Real Rinstar on Instagram and Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter, somewhat active on Instagram. I also am really active on Twitch. I stream at least 3 or 4 times a week on twitch.tv/word and nerd. So again, all of that will be in the bio. And Weaver, what were you going to plug?
I want to tell everybody once again about the Primordium reading group. It's a reading group hosted by me and several of my TikTok mutuals, including Kenna, who was a guest on one of our previous episodes. Throughout the month, each of the co hosts rotate choosing a reading, and we do a read aloud live stream on my friend Madeline's Twitch channel at the Eclectic Library every Tuesday evening around 6:30. That live stream is open to everybody. Anybody can join it and like comment in the chat. But if you would like to join the interactive group discussion following that live stream at 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, all you've got to do is subscribe to me on Patreon and you'll get access to that Primordium Discord server. There's a lot of cool readings every week. I chose the reading this past week, which, you know, well, this episode will go out in like November. But for me, I chose the reading last week, which was the short story from the Harlem Renaissance, Smoke, Lilies, and Jade by Richard Bruce Nugent. And we had a big discussion about how many people in the Harlem Renaissance tried to sleep with Langston Hughes and also how many were successful. Um, so, so
What a way to put that.
so if you would like to learn about that sort of thing, subscribe to me on Patreon, but also you can check out the VOD on Madeline's Twitch channel. Once again, that's the Eclectic Library, and you can find me on Patreon at the Woodmother, and my other socials are also the Woodmother. Instagram, etc. The only difference is on TikTok, it's the underscore Woodmother. Can't forget that. Anything else to promote? No, I think that's it. Oh yeah, also subscribe to me on YouTube. I'm working on a couple of video essays. I've been doing a lot of research into the Harlem Renaissance, and I want to be making more content about that because there's a lot of really cool history there. So yeah, follow me on YouTube and TikTok and etc. All right, what about you, Jhariah?
Oh man. I don't think I actually have anything specific to promote right now. In a big moving in silence era right now. I'm not
Nice.
got a lot of things in the works, but for now, I'm Jhariah underscore on TikTok and at Jhariah Claire pretty much everywhere else. Gonna be putting out some stuff real soon, so follow on there, follow on Spotify or wherever you listen to
Yes,
music,
definitely.
and much to come, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, awesome. Oh, also, Since Parker is not here, I'm going to remind everybody to go follow Parker at HumbleTortoise on YouTube and TikTok, on Instagram as humble.tortoise, and on Spotify as Witch Hazel.
Yes,
right.
indeed. And all of those links, of course, as always, will be in the description. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, now we're back.
It'll all make sense in the edit.
We're back. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by hearing you talk about like how you came to conceptualize music, because I've been working on this story for 2 years. It's called Gate City Blues. And one of like the seeds of this story was when I was in 12th grade. I was really fascinated by the blues. I watched "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" for the first time.
Oh my
and, like,
god, masterpiece.
talk about music affecting you. Like, oof, yeah.
That soundtrack is a masterpiece and remains a
It is
masterpiece.
truly like that soundtrack single-handedly like made bluegrass relevant again.
It literally it revived. Not only did it revive the bluegrass like interest in bluegrass, it truly people did not give a fuck about bluegrass until that movie came out. But also the fact that the people who compiled the soundtrack actually took the time to like properly credit where they got the music.
Yeah.
They actually that first. Have you seen the
That-
movie Jhariah?
I don't think so.
So
It's
it opens with this song
There's like this
called
black chain gang.
Yeah, it's a
that's
chain
all
gang.
singing
and it's
together.
not even like, I mean, they're prisoners on a chain gang, and the main characters is like George Clooney and some other people are on a chain gang and they're singing this song, but it was actually a recording of a black chain gang from like the 1930s that some musicologist had recorded as,
Like one of the Lomax recordings.
Yes, it's one of the Lomax recordings. And the people who put together "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" literally tracked down the guy who was the lead singer, a black guy who was a prisoner at the time in the 30s. At this point, he's like 70 or 80 years old. They tracked him down and they gave him royalties for using that recording, which it was public domain. They did not have to give anybody credit for that. But they tracked down the guy who was singing lead on that and they gave him royalties for it, which is crazy.
Yeah,
Awesome.
like more people should do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw that when I was in high school, and I was like, I want to write a story that makes people feel the way that this movie made me feel, except with more black people.
Yes.
Because
There's like a blackface scene in that movie that I'm just okay with because it's such a good movie.
There's a very short list of movies that include blackface that black people watch it and they're like, well, in context, I'll let it pass. That's like one of very few movies where the blackface is actually like, well,
contextually it makes sense, and they also help a black guy escape the Klan in a great scene. So,
so there's actually
I'm gonna have to just see it.
Yes, 100%. There's a black guy. One of the he was based off of the blues guitarist Robert Johnson. Speaking of Trickster Gods and Crossroads, there's a very strong element within the blues of when the blues talks about the devil. You can almost like make a direct one-to-one comparison with like a pre-existing like folk song about Eshu Elegbara from like the Yoruba people. So like a lot of that mythology like was retained within African American folklore. They just like changed his name to the devil. But the theory was that Robert Johnson met the devil at a crossroads in Mississippi at midnight and sold his soul to the devil in exchange for the ability to play guitar. Now, he did not come up with this myth on his own. Randos made it up about Robert Johnson, and he just didn't deny it because he
leaned into the mythology of it. Well, and it ties in perfectly to what we were talking about in the last episode about how like be the monster people think you are anyway. Like black people were so commonly associated with demonic things, and like with jazz music
blues was called the devil's music. Like just like the whole concept of selling your soul to the devil was just if you played church music before and now you play the blues for money and like go to bars and drink alcohol, that was selling your soul to the devil for all intents and purposes.
It's anti-blackness at the root.
Yeah, isn't it always?
Yeah, isn't it always? It genuinely is always.
There's a character based off of him in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" And when I was in high school, I got really interested in the blues, but I couldn't understand it. Like when you try to look up what is the blues, it's like so nebulous because like one definition is like, oh, it's it's the 3 verses with like this amount of repetition, but you look at like self-accompanied male blues guitarists like Blind Willie McTell, like Robert Johnson. And then you look at like the vaudeville blues, like female blues singers like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith. Those are like two completely different genres, but they're both
Yeah.
called the blues.
Yeah.
Why? And it's I I wanted to understand the blues. I still don't. I still don't. It's just been years, years and years and years. I have like a book from the library that is just like a compilation of like hundreds of blues lyrics that I got because I wanted to like parse them out like you would with a poem to what is it when you with the accent marks to
Annotate.
find like yeah, to
Yeah.
try to figure out the because like
Or conjugate.
I want to understand it, but it feels so nebulous, and it
Mm.
almost feels like unfair. Like, how come other people like this sort of thing just comes naturally to them, but it feels like I have to work so much harder to be able to understand what the music is doing and like how to replicate
Yeah.
it.
And I would say to that, and I would love to hear Jhariah's perspective on this, but like, I think the idea of genres in and of itself is a nebulous concept. We talk about this a lot in like just music. I used to have a music podcast. We talked about like genre has so much room for wiggling and interpretation and stuff like that. And when we get to like some of these genre debates have a really real weird impact on today's society. Like look at Lil Nas X. When Lil Nas X broke through with Old Town Road, there was an entire discourse about whether it belonged on the country charts or not. And it was
Yeah.
like, some people were like, well, no, I mean, it doesn't fit the genre constraints of country. But then other people pointed out that there are literally so many modern country artists that do not fit the traditional genre constraints of country. And country itself is just blues for white people. So
Yeah. So many modern day country artists are like trying to rap also. And
yes.
it just
Oh
feels
yeah,
really
they're
incongruous.
doing that now. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
it's
the whole idea of like
cringy.
everything fitting into this neat little genre box in the first place is silly. And I know that Weaver and I have already talked about like that whole like Mama Rainey had a totally different style to like Blind Willie McTell. And it's like because women weren't allowed to like be on the streets playing guitar, they'd be like thrown
Yeah.
in jail.
Yeah, that's something I noticed in my research is that so most female blues singers weren't self-accompanied. Folks like Blind Willie McTell on the recordings is just him playing his own guitar. Whereas female blues musicians like Ma Rainey, like Bessie Smith, they would sing and they would have a jazz band accompanying them. And when you think about the kinds of places women were expected to sing, cabarets, saloons,
Church.
well, yes, people well, singing the blues
Yeah.
was very strongly associated with like alcohol. Yeah, I've done a lot of research into like the history of prohibition as well. But uh drinking, like the way alcohol was sold, like you couldn't just like get a bottle of beer. If you wanted to drink, you would go to the saloon. Like you had to leave your house to do it, and it was very heavily associated with like male culture. If women were going to drink, they, would drink like health tonics at home because they didn't leave their house to go to bars, but men did. And when they would go to a saloon, what would they want to hear? They would want to hear a woman sing, probably wearing a skimpy dress. And so women like the women's like vaudeville style blues was, it got its start in buildings, where probably there was a piano, and the woman
Mm.
didn't have to learn how to play her own instrument because like her body was what people were coming to see.
Which is ironic
Whereas
because most of them were gay. Hello.
yeah. Whereas folks like Blind Willie McTell, if you were a man, you could just walk around on the street and stand on a street corner and play
Mhm.
the guitar for tips. You couldn't do that if you were a woman. You would get arrested for prostitution. Yes. And so you can see how that affected the ways that the genre diverged.
It's also
Um,
so wild to me to think about like how we see this in Oh Brother Where Art Thou. We even see it in the Elvis movie that just came out recently. I don't know if either of you saw it, but I watched it with a friend. And
I
like
watched
the
it
fact
recently. Yeah.
yeah, the fact that in the 1930s there were just like radio stations in the middle of nowhere and anybody could just walk into the station and be like, I have a song to record.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of how I came to try to understand the music, so I have to like I do you watch Steven Universe, Jhariah?
I've actually recently started trying to actually watch the whole thing. I never have like in
Okay,
full.
that's valid. There's a scene from like one of the final seasons where
I'm really
there's
looking
like
forward to what you're going to say
there's,
here because I have watched Steven Universe and I'm
there's
just
the
curious where we're
pearl
going.
the pearl inside Pearl's head, inside Pearl's head,
Oh yeah,
inside Pearl's
yes, yes,
head,
yes.
which
The
is like
Pearlception.
nested. Yes.
Yeah.
So I have to sort of like externalize. So like in order to try to understand the blues, I had to create a fictional character who was contemporary to those blues musicians who would go and interview them. So I could like it was just sort of like this nest like Russian nesting doll. Like I created this fictional persona that I can imagine, befriends Blind Willie McTell and does an interview with him and like asks him questions. And when I try to figure out, okay, how would Blind Willie McTell answer these questions, then I go do research. And so it's like this framework, like the way for you being able to like produce music and visualize it, on a screen, that is in a similar way I use like um the fiction of creating these characters who befriend musicians in order to try to learn about the process. But yeah, it's interesting the way you sort of like have to externalize um that sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think for me, it really ended up being the piano. Like everything I once I could like see a piano roll and like look at it digitally, I that really
Mm.
clicked for me. And even now, like anything like musically or like arrangement wise, even if when I'm playing other instruments, I'm imagining it on the piano.
Hmm.
That's why I'm having a hard time learning guitar because it's kind of got its own visual language. But it's
Yeah.
like when I play a C chord on guitar, like I'm picturing a C chord on the piano and I'm trying to follow along. Like it's kind of
Interesting.
like it's kind of like being fluent in two languages versus being fluent in one language and being able to translate to a different language, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, that
It's like your
I
schema is challenged because you have this whole like your schema is built around piano and then you're trying to like adjust it to other things and it can be hard. Like I have that same experience. I play a little guitar. I'm way better at guitar than piano, but that's not to say that I'm exceptionally good at guitar. But yeah, conceptualizing things like chords. I mean, piano is so different because I can conceptualize a chord. I can break down a chord on the piano, but when it comes to like fluently playing or getting my brain to work, like one thing I always had so much trouble with is like playing two different hands at the same time. Like, okay, play the melody here and play the harmony here.
Yeah.
My brain was just like short circuiting.
the most successful I've been at trying to learn an instrument was the spoons.
Hey,
Which
you know Abby the Spoon Lady?
yeah, she used to be my mutual before my account got hacked.
Oh yeah, I met her. I went to a
Oh,
tour.
that's
She
wild.
is such an interesting woman. She literally got her start like this playing spoons. She was a hobo. Like she just self describes as a hobo, and she would train hop. She train hop to get away from her abusive husband. And in one of the towns she got to, there were
What a
some
life.
spoons on a table outside of a restaurant. She stole the spoons and started playing them to like make money because that was the only way
Huh.
that she was like homeless. And so
Incredible.
that's how she learned how to play the spoons.
Yeah, now she's like
Man.
one of the most well-known spoon players like
Yeah.
that there is currently. But yeah, because like the spoons doesn't have notes. It's just like I'm like, okay, I already have a hard enough time with the rhythm, but like adding in like melody, that's just too much. I'm gonna stick to just trying to make a beat. Um, but it looks like we're coming close to the end. I think the last question I want to ask Jhariah is what uh do you have any do you have like a dream project like
Do
oh
you
you
ever
know
have a dream when you like you would you wish you could do
like do you have uh
Nice.
sorry
I just thought you said do you have a dream? I was like, do you ever have a
when
dream?
you um so I have an idea in my head like oh if I start a band this is the kind of this is the kind of music I want to make that it has nothing to do with what I'm actually capable of right it's just like my pipe dream this is the kind of sound um that I want to be able to capture. Do you have anything that you would really like to explore in the future that you haven't like already played around with? Like any types of sounds, any genres, any instruments that you would be interested in, exploring in the future?
Hmm.
Good
That's
question.
an interesting question. I mean, I mean, okay, so here's what I think. I guess my answer right now, musically, as far as like ideas I have, and I guess like taking it back to the whole question about developing a sound, the record I'm working on currently is really just me doing like everything, like just all of those like dream ideas and all of the stuff that I'm like I really want
Nice.
to do. Kind of the goal with this record is just put it all on there, and I figure by the time I've done it, that'll like make me want to do some new things that I like
Yeah.
haven't thought of. But also, I would love to like get into television one day. I feel like that's like a medium
Ooh,
I really
yeah.
am interested in, like television and film. Obviously, like having
Oh yeah.
an animation background, that's definitely something I could see myself like you know eventually getting into. But
Yeah.
And
How long have
music,
you
like
been?
the music
thoughts?
for video games and like and movies and TV is so underappreciated
Like
because
video
like
game
that
soundtracks?
yes, and that can make or break your experience with a piece of media. Like
For
the
sure.
soundtrack, somebody was breaking down the soundtrack of like Breath of the Wild. Some of the most incredible sound work, not just the soundtrack. I mean, the soundtrack is beautiful, but even just the sound, like just the
The
sounds
soundscape.
of yeah, the soundscape in general, like the sounds of
Yeah.
Link's feet and how it sounds differently on grass versus on gravel versus on sand
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff. So many details that you don't consciously think about, but like it helps. That's why I can play Breath of the Wild for like 6 straight hours and just not even know any time has passed. Like,
Yeah, and like it really creates like the immersion, especially if we're talking about video games, which I can
Yeah.
yeah,
talk about all day. But
hell
How
yeah.
long have you been working on this new record, Jhariah?
I wrote it down actually. So
Ooh.
Ooh,
I keep
we love
I
a
keep
prepared guest.
I keep a Google Doc of like every idea I have. Like I throw all of it in there. It's just
Nice.
titled Album 2 because like I figure every single like idea I have is like in one way or another going to end up on this album. So it's all there, and I made the document, and at the beginning of it says officially started October 25th, 2018. So
Nice.
that's where it
Ooh.
is.
Wow.
And it's kind of crazy in here. There's like 6 versions of like a synopsis that I have crossed out because
Yeah, I
they
know how
all
it
like
is.
became irrelevant. There's like a track list and a
The
bunch of
entire creative
terrible
process.
ideas.
Right.
Pretty much, yeah.
No, I was just like I've been procrastinating writing my story for 2 years because I keep focusing on the research, and I'm like I just want to learn things because
Mm.
like for me the plot of the story was just a roadmap to guide me through learning the things that I would have wanted to learn had I not dropped out of college. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
like it was just a means for me to give myself an education.
Yeah.
And like
that's like
doing the research was like so fun that like I I don't want to commit to starting writing because I want to keep researching.
oh my god. Okay, can I bring this full circle? Actually,
Yes, you
that
can.
Absolutely,
really
you can.
that
We'd love
totally
that.
reminds me. So that's like exactly what my first album was. Like I never written a song before that album.
Wow.
Besides like I like produced some electronic stuff, but that was the first time. Like those songs, are the first 12 songs I've ever written in my life. There's nothing before that. There's no like because I was like I want to learn how to make music and how to produce and how to write and arrange. That was when I learned music theory the second time when it actually stuck. And it was like this thing where I was like, I'm gonna use this album to like learn how music works. I obsessively listened to all of my favorite songs and to just be like, what is this melody? What are these chords? Like, why does all of this work? And every single song in that record was like a way of me parsing through all of my favorite like music and just figuring out like what
Interesting.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
That's
makes a lot
oh,
of
that's
It was
sense.
that's so
a fun little
fascinating.
research project.
I feel like your brain and my brain work in similar ways.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do feel that.
Same. And like I feel the exact same way, which is why we asked the question earlier. Like Weaver asked me in a private chat, like, what's a polite way of asking if he's autistic?
I get asked that a lot, funnily enough.
Some people think it's an insult. Some people think it's an insult, and like I never mean it that way because I think being autistic is a good thing.
Yeah, I think
I
it's
love being
awesome. It's like a
autistic.
superpower.
Yeah, some people get offended when you ask.
Yeah,
But
no, I
like
feel like it's a very astute observation.
but yeah, God, there's so many more things I wish we could talk about, but there's only
Yes.
so much time can go into one podcast
But there's no
episode.
law that says we can't have you on again. We like you. We got
Yeah,
to
we
bring Parker,
definitely.
True.
who is
I'm
also a
Yes.
down.
musician. So Parker's gonna want
Yeah,
to meet you.
we definitely have
Hell
to get you
yeah.
back in season 2 so you can meet Parker. Also, yeah, I'd love to chat more sometime about picking your brain about how you got started producing
Absolutely. I'd love
music.
to.
I'd love to just, especially now cuz I'm the one that does the editing for the podcast. Like I, I am so editing the video I can do. Like I made a really cool like talk about anime intro. I did like a sitcom style intro with like all of our Sims like
I
to
saw
your
that.
song. Yeah,
It
Yeah.
was so
like
involved. I was like,
editing
how did you do this?
editing video clicks for me. And then
Yeah.
I'll go to edit the audio and I'm like, okay, what does equalizer mean again? And my husband's like, I explained this to you twice. And I'm like, but what? Like just the mechanics of audio editing just feels so foreign.
Yeah, okay, that's another thing. So I produce an FL Studio, and that was just like by chance because like my music teacher told me about it when I was 11, and I've just used it ever since. But it turns out that it's a very different software from like most other
Mm.
like DAWs and most other like music production programs. Like there's a pretty standard way that these things are set up, and I remember meeting other people that use things like Pro Tools, which is like the industry standard, or like Logic, and seeing FL Studio, and they were like, "This looks like a video game. Like this doesn't look
Mhm.
like a tool for making
Interesting.
music."
Like the
And I
UI
was like,
is oh
"Oh, maybe that's why it makes so much sense to me." And I remember
Yeah.
trying
yeah.
to use other things, and I was like, "Oh, this is terrible." So like, I have to just like so much of what I'm trying to do, I just have to think of. Whereas like FL Studio, it really is like a little video game. And I remember because you brought up the equalizer, and it's like the equalizer in there is just like a little chart that you like click and drag like the little dots around. And I'm like, that makes
Nice.
sense to me. This looks like
Yeah.
sounds, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, cuz like even with like visual art, I have a really hard time drawing, but I can like sculpt. I can like move things around in 3 dimensions, but when I have to try to
That
like
makes
make it
sense.
flat, I can't get the lines right. But if I can hold it in my hand, then I can like smush it and like I feel like a lot of different sorts of UIs can sort of be similar to that dichotomy of like to
Yeah.
be able to like
Oh my
visualize and
god,
push
yeah.
things around.
Yeah.
I could do a whole podcast about UI. I think about it so much, but totally, yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on, Jhariah. It's really been cool talking to you and talking, even though our conversation went literally here, there, and everywhere, like it always does.
Oh yeah.
But thank you
I
so much
really
for.
wonder where you planned for it to go because we
We
went
never
for
really
a
planned.
lot of
We
places.
always have a general idea, and then we just kind of let fate take us wherever it's going to take us. Maybe
Hell
we'll talk about the
yeah!
devil at the crossroads and Yoruba goddesses. Like you never know.
Hey, I had a fun time.
When we had Kenna on the show, the plan was to talk about like black horror and Jordan Peele, and we got on this we got on this tangent dunking on W.E.B. Du Bois. We got on a bunch of tangents about zombies, which ended up being relevant.
Yeah,
We
that
got
was
on a
relevant.
tangent about fan fiction. There's
Twilight.
yeah yeah.
You just never
There
know
are
where it's
lots
gonna
of
go, but
exactly.
it's always a good. And then people really like that. Like I've literally already had people commenting. We've only released one episode, and people are already like, "When's the next episode?" I'm like,
Yeah, they're
"Yeah,
like,
let's get hype."
it sounds like you're just friends talking around a table. I'm like, well,
That's basically
Yeah,
what it is.
we don't really have a plan. We're just kind of winging it.
I
Yeah,
love
Um,
that.
yeah, I'm
but
going to send you, Jhariah, my Spotify playlist. I have a Spotify playlist called Roguish Carnival Roustabout. It's very like a dark cabaret heavy. Also a lot of Will Wood. Also, I saw you like, didn't you go on tour
cool.
with
Yeah.
Will Wood or like do a show with him once?
Oh yeah, I did like a
God,
live stream thing with his
God,
the
it's so cool.
albums like like campaign release thing to like raise money for it, and that
I
was like a
am
crazy little
I am such a huge Will
time.
Wood stan. and Schaefer James. But yeah, like the if you ever
I also
wanted,
recently met Schaefer. It was really cool.
oh, your life.
We'll
Oh
we'll
gosh.
we'll see what happens
Yeah.
there.
If you
Things might be
ever
in the works.
if you ever wanted to go, yeah, into a more like sort of vintage dark cabaret direction, God, that would be or like I've been talking lately, like there needs to be a rockabilly revival.
Yeah.
There was a rockabilly revival in the 90s, and it's been like 30 years. I think it's time. I think it's time it comes back around again.
Yeah. I mean, hey, a lot of things can happen on this record. You know, who knows?
Yes.
It's
Ooh.
a real party so far. I'm not gonna
My
lie.
current karaoke standards are the Stray Cat Strut by the Stray Cats and Mr. Pinstripe Suit by Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, and I'm looking forward to finding more karaoke standards on your next album.
Oh,
I have a
amazing!
feeling
I
I
hope
can.
I want to get some of
Yeah.
this to be like karaoke stuff. I think it'd
Yeah,
be fun.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I tried to close this out 5 minutes
yeah.
ago, and then we
Sorry,
get
we
started.
gotta
This is
start
it.
again.
It's
Oh,
happening.
yeah,
It's
it's
over.
happening. We got some of it. We just got to put our foot down. But thank you so much for joining us, Jhariah. Thank you so much for
Of
listening to Close
course.
Encounters of the Blerd Kind. We really appreciate everyone following, liking, subscribing. If you're listening to this on YouTube or watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe and click the little bell so you see when we upload. If you're listening to this on another podcatcher like Apple Podcasts or like Spotify, just make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you rate us and give us a 5 stars, hopefully, and let us know. Leave a review. Let us know how
Yeah.
we're doing. Let us know anything you want to hear from us. We have our email. We recently started an Instagram, so we have that. There's lots of places to reach out to us on social media, and of course, like just our email if you have suggestions about people you want to see. If you are a Black nerd and you have a topic that you would love to see covered, and you want to maybe potentially us interview you, let us reach out. Let us know. And is there anything else I'm leaving out, Weaver?
Did you mention that if you want to be a sponsor for the show, so we can have a real proper
They're in
ad
there.
break? Yeah, close encounters of the blurred kind at gmail.com.
Yes, and that'll be in the description, of course. And we especially would love to work, like if you're a small brand and you just like want to get your name out there or whatever, and we will work with you because we love to work with those small indie brands. We're not trying to do like Amazon sponsorships, shit like that. So like please let us know if there's like if you have a business or a brand or something you want to promote or what have you, and we'll discuss it.
We can do like Jumbotron like they did on Adventure on Mabim Bam. Just $100 and we'll read your Jumbotron.
Oh yeah.
Happy birthday to so and so.
That's the way to
Yeah,
do it.
yes. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time.
And wait, we got our
wait.
the last part of our outro is, finally thank you to Jhariah for the use of your song intro, Beginner's Guide to Faking Your Death for the intro and
Anytime.
outro.
And please go check out Jhariah on YouTube and everywhere else. Listen to his music; it's great, as you've already seen. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.
Stay blerdy.
Stay blerdy.
I'm trying to make that happen.